Good evening, guys. Yesterday we have discussed some array related problem and as well as two design patterns. Right shift by two we have done array. Right shift by two elements. Next, reversing even indexed elements. Reversing even indexed elements. Anybody wrote the logic for that? Reverse only even indexed of elements. Anybody has the solution? So one question I got, sir, the class recordings aren't uploaded in Genesis website. Is that a question or what? So actually, you might be getting the link for this recorded video. Okay. So you can check with the Genesis. Okay. Like whether they are allowing you to access the recorded video. Are they sending you the recorded video link?
So for first three classes we have got the recordings in the website. For remaining classes
Okay.
they haven't uploaded, I think, or else I can't find them, the recent recordings.
Oh, fine, fine. I'll just inform it to the concerned person, okay, and they will get back to you. Fine.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So please observe here. Reverse only even indexed of the elements in the given array. What is the total length here? Total length. Whether it is even or odd. Whether the length is even or odd. Total number of elements it is 10. Total number of elements it is 10. Now it is even. Even length. Indexes it is between 0. Index is starting from 0 and ending at a 9. Length is 10. Index is from 0 to 9. And the elements and the length is even. So the final array should be look like this. Okay, what happened here? Please observe. Reversing only even indexed elements. So what are all the even indexed elements are there? 0 and 8. 0 and 8 should be swapped. 0 and 8 should be swapped. 3 should go to the 8th index and 8 should be go to the 0th index. These two are even indexes. Even indexes. Next even index, that is 2. Then 6. Whatever the element is there at the 6th index, that should be swapped with the second index. 1 and 9 are swapped. 1 and 9 are swapped. reversing even indexed elements. Then the only even index we have left, that is 4. We don't have another element to swap with, so we are just leaving it. So only 2 iterations we need, 2 swaps, 2 swaps. 3 and 8 should be swapped. 1 and 9 should be swapped. The final array will be looking like this. Initial array content. Initial array content. This is the initial array content. Now, please observe this logic. This is the logic. So this logic we can able to perform on both even indexed, sorry, both on even length and odd length. Okay, doesn't matter of the array length. We can perform the operation on both even length and odd length array. Even number of elements and odd number of elements. See, can anybody go through step by step this logic? What is the first iteration? What happens in case of first iteration? Int last even index. Int last even index is equal to x dot length mod 2. What is the length here? 10. 10 mod 2. 10 can be divided by 2, becoming 0. If that is the case, it will be executing x dot length minus 2. Last even index will be x dot length minus 2. That means 10 minus 2, that is 8th index. It is pointing to the 8th index. That is the even index. Right or wrong? That is the even index. Now, in case if the length is odd, like I have 11, okay, 11. So here the condition becoming false, condition becomes false. Now x dot length minus 1, length is 11, minus 1, 10. 10 is the even index. 10 is the even index. If in case if the array length is odd, if in case the array length is even, this is the solution. X dot length minus 2, it is pointing to the even index, that is 8. If in case the length is 11, x dot length minus 1, 11 minus 1, 10 is the even index. If in case of odd length, what happens for the first iteration? For the first iteration, see, this is the original array. We are performing operation on this array. Now I value is 0, last index, that is 8. Last index, that is 8. right? That is only we have performed. Int last index is equal to x dot length minus 2, that is 8. 10 minus 2, that is 8. For loop is executing. So int I is equal to 0. This one will be executing only once for this iteration. For the next iteration until this becomes false, I it is only executing once. This initialization part executes only once for the for loop. From the next iteration, it will be only checking the condition. Now, I is equal to 0, whether 0 less than 5. Why? Because x dot length. Now the length of our array is 10 by 2, that is 5. 10 by 2, that is 5. 0 less than 5. Yes. Now come to the if block. Whether I and last even indexes are same. No. False. Come to the body of for loop. X of I, that is 0. X of I, that is 0. Now what is the element that is available at x of 0? 3. Now x of last index 8. In that index we have 8, the element 8. X of I plus x of last even index. X of 0, that is 3. X of 8, that is 8. X of 0, that is 3. X of 8, that is 8. Becoming 11. Becoming 11. Now x of 0, it is 11. Whatever the operations we have performed, the result will be storing to the x of I, that is x of 0. Now x of 0 is 11. X of 0 is 11. What happens in the next statement? X of last even index 8 only. Now what is the element that is available? 8. X of 0, we have 11 from the previous statement. X of 0 got modified from 3 to 11. Now x of 0 value, it is 11. X of I minus x of last even index. X of I minus x of last even index. X of I value, that is 11. X of 0 that contains 11, that is 11. Minus x of last even index, that is 8. 11 minus 8, that is 3. Now x of 8 becoming 3. Here, x of last index we are storing. For the x of last index, x of 8 becoming 3 now. Becoming 3. Last index x of 8 becomes 3 now. X of 0, that is 11 from the last iteration. X of 0, that is 11. Sorry, it is not last iteration, it is from the before one statement. For the first statement, x of 0 became 11. Now x of 0, it is 11. Now x of last even index, that is 8 only. We have 3. That is from the previous statement. That is from the previous statement. X of 8, it is 3. Now x of I, 11 minus x of last even index 3. In the x of 0th place we have 11. X of 8th place we have 3. 11 minus 3. 11 minus 3 becoming 8. Now x of 0 stored with 8. X of 0 stored with 8. X of 0 stored with 8. Swap. Now whatever the element are there in x of 8 and x of 0 got swapped. Earlier x of 0 was 3. X of 8 was 8 before this iteration. X of 0 was 3 and x of 8 was 8. Now x of 8 is 3, x of 0 is 8. X of 0 become 8, x of 8 becomes 3. So we can compare previous array, modified array. 0 and 8 swapped. 0 and 8 swapped. Now what happens? I is incremented to 2. That means I value incremented 2 times. I value incremented 2 times. 0 becoming 2. 0 becoming 2. Last even index becoming last even index, it is decremented by 2. Last even index, that is decremented 2 times. Earlier it was 8, now it is becoming 6. Now it is becoming 6. Come to the next iteration. Keep track of the array. Now I value is 2, last even index is 6. Whether 2 less than 5 becoming true. 2 less than 5. That is the for loop. We are checking in the for loop. Now whether I and last even index are same becoming false. So if block won't be executed, come to the 3 statements that is available in the for loop. Now we are going to swap x of 2 and x of 6, x of 2 and x of 6, x of 2 that is 1, x of 6 we have 9, x of 2 that is 1, x of last even index that is 6, sorry, last even index, the element in the last even index that is 9, 1 plus 9, 1 plus 9, x of 2 value 1, x of 6 value 9, 1 plus 9 10, that is storing into the x of 2. The latest element for the x of 2 that is 10, that is 10. Come to the next statement. X of 2 it is 10 now, x of 2 that is 10, last even index 6, it is 9 only. 9. We have element 9 in the last even index 6. Now, last even index, it is reinitializing. Observe. Last even index, it is reinitializing. X of I, 2. 10 minus x of last even index, that is the element in the last even index, that is 9. 10 minus 9. Now, x of last even index becoming 1. X of last even index content is 1 now. Come to the next statement. X of 2, we have 10. X of last even index, that is 6, we have 1. X of 2, we have 10. X of 6, we have 1. X of 2, it is reinitializing now. X of 2 is reinitializing. Earlier, it was last even index, got reinitialized. Now it is the x of 2. Earlier, x of 6 got reinitialized. Now x of 2, it is reinitializing. 10 minus 1. In the x of 2, we have 10. In the x of 6, we have 1. 10 minus 1 becoming 9. Now 9 is storing into the x of 2. X of 6 and x of 2 swapped. Earlier, x of 6 has the value 9 and x of 2 was 1. Now x of 6, it is 1 and x of 2, it is 9. Check out previous and modified array. Come to the third iteration. What happens? See here, after successfully executing these statements, for loop statements, I is becoming 4 incremented by 2. Last even index decremented by 2. That is, earlier it was 6. Now it is decremented by 2. I is 4. Last even index also now it is 4. Here, what happens? Whether 4 less than 5, whether 4 less than 5 becoming true. But what happens here? If condition is executed, if condition is executed, whether 4 double equal to 4. So returning true, executing the continue statement inside the if block. for the third iteration. If block is executed. Why? Because I also 4, last even index also 4. Both are same. Executing the if block body, continue statement is there. What happens in case of continue? It will be skipping to the next iteration. It will be skipping to the next iteration without executing the further statements. Without executing the further statements, it is skipping to the next iteration. It is skipping to the next iteration. Now what happens? I is becoming 6. I is becoming 6. Last even index. Last even index becoming what? Becoming 2. I is 6. Last even index it is 2. Whether 6 less than 5. Whether 6 less than 5. Here we are getting the false. Here we are getting the false. It won't execute the for loop. It will come out. It will come out. Now the final array content will be printed. Final array content will be printed. Observe initial array content and final array content. This is how we can able to reverse even indexed elements. So how many of you know basic data structure? How many of you know basic data structure? What is a data structure? What is a data structure? What is data structure? What is the basic definition? Guys, please respond. How many of you know data structure and algorithms? Shall I continue with the basics? Data structure. How many of you know data structure and what is the level of understanding? Okay, please observe. Basically, what is a data structure? By using data structure, we can able to effectively organize and we can able to use the computer memory. Effective usage of computer memory. What is important here? That is storing and manipulating. What is important? That is storing and manipulating data in the computer memory in the effective way of organizing and manipulating or using data in the computer memory. Please observe this program. So what is going on in this program? In class A, we have one attribute. One attribute. In class A, we have one attribute or we have one property. Int data. Int data. I'm creating 4 time objects here. 4 time objects. 4 time I have created the object. And I'm supplying the value a1 dot data is equal to 10. a2 dot data is equal to 20, 30, 40. Initially, data will be stored with the 0 value only. Why? Because it is int. Default value, that is 0. Initially, it will be stored with the value 0 only. After that, when I'm creating the object, after creating the object, by using the reference, I'm storing the data to the value 10. a1 dot data stored with value 10. a2 dot data, a2 dot data stored with 20. a3 dot data stored with 30. a4 dot data stored with 40. For every object creation, data will be loaded to the memory with the default value, that is 0 in case of int. After that, by using the reference variable, I'm supplying the value, I'm storing the value. It is reinitialization. Please observe this diagram. A1 is pointing to one object. A2 is pointing to another object. A3 is pointing to another object. A4 is pointing to another object. Earlier data is 0. For every object, earlier data is 0. Now, after that, by using A1 reference, we are storing the value. A1 dot data is equal to 10. A2 dot data is equal to 5. A3 dot data is equal to 50. A4 dot data is equal to 20. Earlier data value, it is 0, the default value data. Every time we create an object, that will be stored with the default value. In case of int, that is 0. Then by using the reference of the particular object, we are storing the data. We are storing the values to the data. Now A1 dot data is 10. A2 dot data is 5. A3 dot data is 50. A4 dot data is 20. Come to the next program. Of storing the values by using reference, there is another way we can able to go for. We can able to use the constructor to store the values. We can use the constructor to store the values. In B class, we have two members, int data, and we have the constructor for B. Constructor name should be same as class name. Then the constructor is accepting one argument, that is of type int. In the body of the constructor, it is initializing whatever the value we supply while creating the object, that will be initialized. This dot data is referring to this data. This data is referring to this data. This int space data, whatever is there within the constructor, that is local to this constructor. Now come to the driver class. M2 is the driver class. Now I'm creating four objects. I'm creating four objects. For the first time, I'm creating an object. I'm supplying 10. I'm supplying 10. Now the corresponding constructor will be called here one argument constructor, that is the only constructor we have in the B class, that is accepting one int data, int value. Now we have supplied 10. This dot data, that is the current data, whatever the object that is pointed by B1. B1 is pointing to one object. There data is equal to 0 initially. Data is equal to 0. Now we are sending 10. This 10 is supplied to this dot data, that is pointed by B1. For the first object, 0 is modified with 10. Data value is modified from 0 to 10. For the second object also same. We are supplying 5. Earlier it was 0. Now it is initializing with 5. For the third object also, B3. B3 is pointing to one object. There, data is equal to 0. Now we are sending the 50. This dot data. Earlier it is 0. Now we are sending the 50. 50 is stored to the this dot data. That is the third object. That third object pointed by B3. Third object, it is pointed by B3. For the fourth object, same. 10 is stored. Whatever the object pointed by B4, data value got modified from 0 to 10. We are printing the same B1 dot data, B2 dot data, B3 dot data, B4 dot data. So here, in this case, it is just a separate objects, right? It is just a separate objects. We don't have any link to the objects. We don't have the link to the object. If I want to access the B2, I can only use the B2 reference. If I want to access the B4 object, I can only use the B4 reference. Any other reference we cannot able to access this object. There is no link here. There is no link. Now we will see simple linked list. Single linked list. Linked list in the sense there will be a link from one object to another object, from one node to another node. That means we are considering this object as a node itself. There should be a link from one node to another node, from one object to another object. Then we can able to call it as linked list. There is a link for nodes or objects. Come to the next. In class 3 we have 3 members. In class 3 we have 3 members. One is int data, another one is C type REF reference. C type reference. See this identifier REF, it is the identifier. This can be of anything. That means you can give any name. Okay, you can give any name, not only REF, you can give any name. In most of the cases, they will use node. Sorry, not node. It is next. Next. They will use next. That means reference to the next object. By using this, we can able to assign the next object to this reference. We can able to make the link to the next object by using this next. This can be anything. Ref next, anything. This is of type C. Okay, this is of type C. Now we have the constructor. Then this is the driver class. Driver class. Now, whenever it is loading to the memory data, it is loaded with the 0 value only. Default value 0 only. Then it is reinitialized with the corresponding values whatever we have supplied while creating the object. Now C1 dot data is equal to 10, C2 dot data is equal to 5, C3 dot data is equal to 50, C4 dot data is equal to 10. We can make it as 20. Observe here C1 dot ref is equal to C2. See, we have two attributes here in the C class. One is data, another one is ref. For the C1 dot ref, I'm assigning C2. For the C1 dot ref, I'm assigning C2. Now C1 dot ref is pointing to the C2 object. C1 dot ref is pointing to the C2 object. Then for the C2 ref, see, in every object, all these four objects contains two properties, that is data and ref. Now C2 dot ref, we are supplying C3 object. Now C2 dot ref is pointing to the C3 object. C3 object. Then C3 dot ref is pointing to the C4 object. C4 object. Now there are two ways to access the properties of the C. There are two ways to access the properties of C class. One is by using the corresponding reference variables C1 dot data, C2 dot data, C3 dot data, C4 dot data, corresponding reference variables. We will get 10, 5, 50, 20. Another way is there. By using only C1, by using only C1 reference, I can able to access the remaining objects. By using C1 reference only, I can able to access other three objects. Why? Because we have supplied here, we have given the link. C1 reference is pointing to the C2 object, C2 reference is pointing to the C3 object, C3 reference is pointing to the C4 object. C1 dot data, that is 10, printing 10. C1 dot ref dot data, that means C1 dot ref is pointing to the C2. C1 dot ref is pointing to C2. We are accessing the C2 data. C1 dot ref dot data. In the beginning, I'm just printing C1 dot data. Okay, next. C1 dot ref dot data. Inside the C1, we have another property called ref, that is pointing to the C2 object. In the C2 object, we have data, that is what we are trying to access. Now C1 dot ref is pointing to the second object, C1 dot ref dot data. Now it is 5. C1 dot ref dot data, that is third object. Second object reference is pointing to the third object. Second object reference is pointing to the third object. Now what is the data in the third object? That is 50. Next, C1 dot ref dot ref dot ref dot data. This is the reference is pointing to the next object. That means this is the C1 reference pointing to the C2 reference. C2 reference is pointing to the C3 reference. Observe. Initially, C1 dot data. That is the C1 data. Now, C1 dot ref dot data. That is the C2 data we are trying to access. C1 dot ref dot data. C3 data we are trying to access. C1 dot ref dot data. That is C4 data. Here C1 dot data. C1 dot reference is pointing to the second object. In the second object, reference is pointing to the third object. Here, observe. It is actually, it is a reference for second object. It is a reference for third object. It is a reference for fourth object. Reference for second object, third object, and fourth object. You can see it in the pictorial way. Please observe this diagram. There are two ways we can able to access the objects. One is by using the reference variables only. C1 dot data or C2 dot data or C4 dot data or C5 dot data. Another one is by using the by using the C1 reference only, we can able to access the other three objects. C1 dot ref, it is pointing to the second object. C1 dot ref is pointing to the third object. C1 dot ref is pointing to the fourth object. For the first object, we don't need the reference to print the data, right? C1 dot data, we can get 10. If I say C1 dot ref dot data, c1 dot ref dot data. So this c1 reference is pointing to the second object. c1 dot ref dot data, that means we are trying to access the data of the second object. If in case of first object we don't need the ref, directly we can able to call c1 dot data. For the second object data, we are accessing it through c1 dot ref dot data, that is second object. To access the third object data, c1 dot ref dot data, c1 dot ref dot data, it is pointing to the third object. c1 dot ref dot data, it is pointing to the third object. If in case if I want to access the fourth object, I will say c1 dot ref, it is pointing to the fourth object data. What if I say c1 dot ref dot ref dot ref dot ref? So I'm trying to access the object that is not available. I'm trying to access the object that is not available. In that case, what happens? See, all these references, that is C1, C2, C3, all three references, C1, C2, C3, has the next object, or one object is assigned to these references, to these references. But what happens for the C4? This reference is not assigned to any object. This C4, it is not assigned to any object. If I try to access the object that is not available, what happens? in this case, in this case, we get this output. There are two ways, we know that we got the output. But what happens here? If I say like this, dot ref, fourth object ref, it is pointing nowhere. Fourth object ref, it is pointing nowhere. But I'm trying to access that ref, whether it is pointing to the next object or not, whether it is pointing to one object or not. It is pointing nowhere. If it is pointing nowhere, that ref is null. If it is not pointing anywhere, it is null. I'm trying to access the data that is not available. I'm trying to access the fifth object by using fourth object reference. I'm trying to access the fifth object data by using fourth object reference. Now fourth object reference is null. It is pointing nowhere. Fourth object reference is null. It is pointing nowhere. See, in this case, if the reference is null, if the reference is null, we get the null pointer exception. Null pointer exception. Null pointer exception. Null pointer exception. Because I'm trying to access the reference that is pointing nowhere. I'm trying to access the reference that is pointing nowhere. I'm trying to access the fourth object reference that is pointing nowhere. If that is not pointing, if that is not pointing to any object anywhere, we get the null pointer exception if I try to access that reference. Got this program? How we are making the link from one object to by using reference. Come to the next program. Please analyze what is going on here. Any idea what is going on in this program? What we are trying to do? instead of creating a new reference, instead of creating new reference variables, instead of creating new reference variables, I'm only using C1 only. I'm only using C1. Then for the C1.ref, for the C1.ref, I'm assigning new object. For the C1.ref.ref, I'm assigning new object. For the C1.ref.ref.ref, I'm assigning new object. All these objects contains two properties, data and reference. But what we are doing here, we are only making use of single reference variable, and by using the ref that is available in the C, we are making the link and creating new objects. We are making the link and creating new objects. For the first time, one object is created. C1 is equal to new C of 10. One object is created that is pointed by C1. Now that object, whatever the object that is pointed by C1, contains data and ref, data and ref. So here please modify it to D. The first case, we are creating an object. Okay. In that we have data and ref. Data is equal to 10 and we have the ref. For the first object, ref is null. It is not assigned with any object. It is not assigned with any other object. So for the first object, ref is null. At this point of time, if I try to access the ref, at this point of time, if I try to access the ref, we would get null pointer exception. At this point of time, if I try to access the ref, we get null pointer exception. Next, d1.ref. For the first object reference, I'm assigning new object. For the first object reference, I'm assigning new object, creating a new object. That object is referred by, or that object is pointed by d1.ref. First object ref is pointing to the second object. Now, in the second object also we have the ref, data and ref we have. Second object ref is pointing to the third object. Third object is created and it is supplied or it is referred by second object ref. Now second object ref is pointing to the third object. Third object contains data and reference. In the third object, we are assigning a new object for the third object ref. For the third object reference, we are assigning the new object. Now this object is pointed by Third object reference, I'm printing the same. D1 dot data, D1 dot ref dot data, D1 dot ref dot ref dot data, D1 dot ref dot ref dot ref dot data. So here there is no D2, D3, D4. By using D1 only, we can able to create the object and we can able to link the objects. So what is the uh, in how can I represent it in the diagram? Please observe this diagram carefully. In this case, you can modify it to D. By using only single reference variable, we can able to access other three objects. There is no different reference variables like D2, D3, D4. Observe carefully this diagram. So what we are trying to do here, we are avoiding the unnecessary reference variables. We are avoiding unnecessary reference variables like creating A2, A3, A4. By using A1 only, we can able to access all other objects. How we are able to access? That is by using the reference variable. We are making a link from one object to another object. So it is the single point of contact for the entire structure. It is the single point of contact for the entire structure. A1 is the single point of contact for the entire structure, for all the objects. Got it or not? Just give me 2 minutes. I'll be sharing you the attendance link. Please observe here. So now move on to the next program. Please observe this program, what we are trying to do. See, still we have 30 minutes. See what we are doing in this program. What is going on in this program? whether we have the single point of contact or not. We are not creating more reference variables. By using only single reference variable, we are accessing all the objects. So here, one more variable is there. One more reference element. It is of type E. I'm supplying E1. I'm supplying E1. For whatever the object that is pointing to the reference, for whatever the object E1 reference is pointing, for the same object, element reference should also point. E1 is equal to, sorry, element is equal to E1, element is equal to E1. Element is equal to E1. So before this statement, however, how is our data? It is looks like. Please observe this diagram. E1 is pointing to one object, then keeps on adding objects to the references. Totally we have 8 objects. Totally we have 8 objects. This is before creating element reference variable. Before creating element reference variable. Now after creating reference, what is the diagram? Please observe. After creating the element, for whatever the element, sorry, for whatever the object E1 is pointing, for whatever the object E1 is pointing, for the same object element also should point. Element should also be pointing. For whatever the object E1 is pointing, for the same object element also should point. Come to the first iteration of the while. Come to the first iteration of the while loop. What happens? While element not equal to null. While element not equal to null. E1 is pointing to one object, this object. Now element also should be pointing to the same object. Now element is not null. Element is not null. So we are printing the same element dot data. First object data we are printing. Then we are reassigning the element dot ref, element dot ref, this one. We are supplying to the element now. Element dot ref, we are supplying to the element now. This element dot ref is pointing to the next object. This element dot ref is pointing to the next object. For the same object, element also should point. What is the diagram? Please observe this diagram. Now element is pointing to the second object. Element is pointing to the second object. Element is pointing to the second object. E1 is pointing to the first object only. Okay. Now we have element variable also, element reference also. Now element reference is pointing to the second object. Now come to the program. Element not equal to null. Yes, it is pointing somewhere. Element not equal to null, it is pointing somewhere. Now printing the data of the second object 50. After that, element dot ref, I'm supplying to element. Second object reference, I'm supplying to element. Now second object reference is pointing to the third object. Second object reference is pointing to the third object. Right or wrong? Second object reference is pointing to the third object. Please observe. Second object reference is pointing to the third object. That is only we are assigning. Now element is pointing to the third object. Now element is pointing to the third object. Now element is pointing to the third object. As long as element is null. As long as whenever it is finding null, whenever it is finding null, then it will comes out. If element is not null, if the element is not null, it will be keep on executing the while loop. If the element is null, then it will be breaking the while loop. We don't get the null pointer exception in that case. We don't get the null pointer exception in that case. Try to execute it. Are we getting all the elements? Till 201 we are getting. So by making use of this element reference, we are avoiding the null pointer exception until element not equal to null. Until element not equal to null. See here, what I'll do is I'm inserting one more element dot ref. Instead of using this, let's say here only f try to execute it. Null pointer exception we are getting. I'm trying to access the object that is not available. I'm trying to access the object that is not available. Instead of keeping the SOPs like this, instead of keeping the SOPs like this, even dot data, even dot ref dot data, like that, while printing, I'm making use of this while loop. I'm making use of this while loop. For the first object, E1 is pointing to this 10. Same element also it is pointing for the same object. Now element is not null, right? So it is printing the first object, and first object reference we are supplying to the element. Now element is pointing to the second object. Element is pointing to the second object. Element is not null, printing the data. Now element is second element dot ref is it is sending to the element second object element dot ref, it is supplied to the element. Now element is pointing to the third object, printing the third object data. Then third object element dot reference is pointing to the element, it is supplied to the element. Now element is pointing to the fourth object, element is pointing to the fourth object, printing the data. Fourth is supplied to the element, fourth object reference is supplied to the element. Now element is pointing to the fifth object, printing the same. After that, here fifth object element dot ref, fifth object element dot ref, it is supplied to the element. After printing this fifth object element, that is the data, fifth object element dot reference, that is pointing that is supplied to the element. Now this one pointing to the sixth object, sixth object element dot ref, it is supplied to the element. Now it is pointing to the seventh object, printing the seventh object data. Now element dot ref, element dot ref of the seventh object, element dot ref of the seventh object, it is supplied to the element. Now element dot ref of the seventh object, it is pointing nowhere. Element dot ref of the seventh object, it is pointing nowhere. While loop is breaking, element is not equal to null. Element is null. Element is null. So while loop is breaking, coming out of the while loop. Coming out of the while loop. Till this much, we get the objects. Element will be keep on pointing to the different objects. Element will be keep on pointing to the different objects. At the end, seventh element, seventh object reference, it is pointing nowhere. Seventh object reference is pointing nowhere. That is why it is null. So it is coming out of the while loop. It is coming out of the while loop. If it is not pointing to anywhere, it is null. Got it or not? Once again, look at the diagram. first object is created with the value 10. Data is equal to 10. Reference. To access the first object, we don't need the reference. To access the first object, we don't need the reference. Directly, I can say that e1 dot data. Next, for the first object reference, we are creating new object. For the first object reference, for the first object ref, we are assigning new object. Supplying 5. For the second object reference, we are assigning third object, fourth object, fifth object, sixth, seventh, and eighth. One simple modification here. Totally 8 elements are here. Totally 8 objects are here. Let us change it for 8 objects in the code. The last object in this case, the last object reference, it is pointing to, see, whatever the reference is there, by using this reference, we are creating a new object. We are creating a new object, we are assigning to this ref. Now, in this new object also we have data and ref. In this new object also we have data and ref. And that is pointing nowhere. And that is pointing nowhere. Data contains same, 2 not 1 only. But reference is null. Reference is null. See here, for the first element, we can able to access it directly, e1.data. Now for the e1.ref, okay, for the first object reference, we are assigning the new object. For this object reference, this one, we are assigning the new object. For this object reference, we are assigning the new object. For this object reference, we are assigning the new object. For this object reference, we are assigning the new object. For this object reference, we are assigning the new object. First object reference is pointing to second object. Second object reference is pointing to third object. Third object reference is pointing to fourth object. Fourth object reference is pointing to fifth object. Fifth object reference is pointing to sixth object. Sixth object reference is pointing to seventh object. In the seventh object also we have data and ref. Data and ref. Data is 201 only. Data is 201 only. But reference is null. Reference is null. Reference is null. Now this 201 object reference is pointing nowhere. That is why if I try to into that, okay, if I try to perform like this, dot ref, one more ref, I'm trying to add another object for the here. I'm not assigning object here. I'm not assigning object here. If I assign the object, that would refer to the next created object. So this is the reference variable for this object. For 201 object, this is the reference variable. Now it is pointing nowhere. It is pointing nowhere. Now if I assign the value for it, if I assign the object for it like this, what happens? Whether it is fine or not, it is fine. If the object is there, that is fine. If the object is not assigned to the ref, then we get null pointer exception. Now object 500 is pointing nowhere. Object 500 reference is pointing nowhere. If I try to access that, we get the null pointer exception. Dot ref dot data. I'm trying to access the reference of this new object. that is not that is not pointing anywhere. That is not pointing anywhere. You get the null pointer exception. Exception in thread main. Null null pointer exception at 23. 23 is the line number. At 23 we are getting the error exception. See here what happens if I say 201 only. Why? Because we have the object here. 201 object reference is pointing to another object 201. But if in case I try to access the new object, that is 201 reference, then we would get the null pointer exception because it is pointing nowhere. That is null. If I try to access the new object e of 201, okay, reference is null. Reference is null. It is pointing nowhere. It is pointing nowhere. If I try to access that, we will get the null pointer exception. I'm sending attendance link. Please mark your attendance. So we will continue in the next session. Thank you all. Please mark your attendance.